North Baltimore's Great Fire of 1891, presented by the North Baltimore Public Library and the North Baltimore, Ohio Area Historical Society. October 30th, 1891 was one of the most catastrophic days in the history of North Baltimore, Ohio. Although no human lives were lost, a great fire destroyed over half of the town's commercial area. The conflagration wiped out most of the buildings on North Main Street, leaving blocks of smoking rubble as seen in this photograph taken the morning after the fire. This presentation describes how the fire began and progressed. It will cover how the North Baltimore Fire Department, aided by the Fostoria Fire Department, was able to stop the fire's spread. Their heroic actions prevented even greater destruction. On Friday, October 30th, 1891, a visitor arriving by train at the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Department would have found himself in the center of a growing, prosperous community located approximately 25 miles south of Toledo. The B&O Main Line to Chicago traversed the town from east to west and divided Main Street into north and south sections. With the coming of the oil boom in 1886, the town had rapidly expanded both in population and physical size. By the time of the fire, many of the town's residents had become wealthy with thriving businesses and beautiful new homes. Looking north, this photograph shows North Baltimore's entire North and South Main Streets as they looked in August 1891. While the businesses on North Main would soon be destroyed by fire, those on South Main would be untouched by the Great Fire. With no building codes, merchants had been free to erect any kind of building they wished. Many businessmen had constructed brick buildings along Main Street. Architecturally late Victorian, commercial in style, these 2 and 3 story buildings housed street level retail stores and upper floor offices and apartments. Not only did the brick buildings look better, but many believed they were more fire resistant than wooden buildings. However, as seen in this photograph, there were many poorly constructed wood buildings located along the street. Many housed saloons or cheap restaurants and were constructed of timber salvaged from the oil fields. Despite the oil fueled building boom, the town's infrastructure was still a work in progress. Most streets were unpaved, there was no citywide water system, and the sewer system was inadequate. Nevertheless, the town's citizens looked forward to a thriving future for themselves and the community. North Baltimore's mayor in 1891 was Frank P. Clark, a successful local merchant and the town's leading politician. He ran a pharmacy and furniture store on Main Street and owned this large home. Most of the town council members were local businessmen who, along with other merchants and oilmen, largely controlled the town's political system. Being a boom town, North Baltimore also had attracted a sizable number of less desirable residents, such as gamblers, prostitutes, and drifters. As was common in 19th century boom towns, less law abiding businesses were subject to minimal oversight by town authorities, and saloon keepers were notorious for their lax attention to fire safety. The editors of the town's 2 newspapers, the Beacon and the Times, frequently criticized the town council for not rigorously enforcing laws. In particular, the Beacon's editorials often insinuated that both Mayor Clark and other town officials had a cozy and possibly even an inappropriate financial arrangement with these unsavory elements. Unreliable firefighting capability. Fire protection in North Baltimore was woefully inadequate. In 1891, the major source of water to fight fires on Main Street was a series of 3 rain-filled cisterns at the approximate locations shown in this photograph. The small amount of water held by the cisterns was insufficient for fighting a major fire. Some businessmen, the newspaper editors, the fire chief, and private citizens had complained about the unreliable and inadequate firefighting water supply. They had proposed additional cistern construction, but a council majority would not raise taxes for such improvements. Mayor Clark, to his credit, had supported building a water system. In May 1891, the council had finally contracted with a private company to build and operate a modern water system. However, the system was still under construction when the Great Fire occurred. In 1891, the new city hall housed the town's fire department, which consisted of two fire companies, the Buckeye Hose Company and the older Rescue Hook and Ladder Company. The hose company's job was to pull the fire engine and hose cart to the fire and provide muscle power for operating the pumper. The hook and ladder company manned the hook and ladder wagon. It carried extension ladders and long poles topped with metal hooks. These hooks were used to pull apart walls and other parts of structures, exposing burning interior sections to the hose men. The company trained to tear down entire buildings in a fire's path to prevent further spread. Both companies of the fire department were composed entirely of volunteers. Their bravery and willingness to risk their lives for the town's citizens was not questioned. However, the Beacon editor often commented on their lack of training and poor performance at fires. In this photograph, the Rescue Hook and Ladder Company is standing in front of Town Hall. There are no known photographs of the North Baltimore Fire Department's hand pumper or hose carts. However, their equipment was likely very similar to the one shown in this and the next photograph. The two carts each had two large, high wheels with a reel containing 500 feet of hose between them. The carts were very heavy and difficult to pull over dirt streets. Upon reaching the fire scene, getting water to a fire was not an easy task. Fire engines had to be parked within a few feet of the water supply, usually a cistern or ditch. The crew of 8 men, 4 on each handrail, had to pump vigorously to get the water to the blaze. Even a young man in good health could only pump for 5 minutes before he would have to be relieved. Since the entire crew had to be changed simultaneously, all pumping had to cease for a brief period. If a fire took considerable time to bring under control, volunteers would be sought among bystanders to relieve the firemen. When one man replaced another, it was necessary to temporarily halt the rapid up and down movement of the handbars, interrupting the stream of water. By 1891, 23 saloons, similar to Charlie Pfeiffer's in this photo, had been established, largely to serve oil field workers. Pfeiffer's pet dog, Keno, can be seen sitting on the table on the right. Keno became the fire's only fatality after running back into the burning saloon. Many of Main Street's wooden buildings dated from the 1870s, like those in the photo on the left. Their wood walls were very dry, and their wooden floors were often soaked by spilled coal oil. Most stores lit by natural gas lamps, and the gas line supplying them would be a contributing factor to the fire spread. When they ruptured during building collapses, escaping natural gas became large, uncontrolled blowtorches which spread the fire. As seen in the photograph on the right, spaces between the buildings and along the alleys that paralleled Main Street were packed with storage sheds, stables, privies or outdoor toilets, and wooden fences. These structures were the major conduit for the fire's spread, especially when a brisk wind was blowing. One of the town's largest buildings, the Henry Opera House, would play a major role on the day of the fire. The Opera House, owned by Dr. Albert Henry, a local physician and entrepreneur, hosted live theater, vaudeville acts, and local activities such as graduations. A previous opera house, owned by Henry, had been destroyed by fire in the 1880s. Henry was determined to prevent such a recurrence. As a fire prevention measure, he ordered the new opera house walls to be constructed stronger, thicker, and higher than was normal. His foresight was fortunate for both his investment and his fellow property owners to the north. Shown in this photograph is the general location of Anna Bracey's saloon, where the Great Fire began. Anna was 21 years old and had two young children and a farmer husband. At the time, operating a saloon was an unusual job for a woman, but hers was one of the most popular liquor joints in town. The Bracy Saloon was located on the west side of North Main Street near the railroad. A large rectangular shed, formerly a bowling alley, stood behind the saloon and was a popular gambling place. Bracy was frequently in trouble with the authorities for selling alcohol to minors or selling after the mandated closing hours. But they never shut her down. The conflagration begins. On Friday, October 30th, 1891, all of Ohio was in the grip of a prolonged drought that had lasted since early summer. The buildings lining Main Street, as well as the natural vegetation, were extremely dry. A brisk, dry wind, not uncommon to this flat region, had been blowing all day from the southwest. That Friday night at about 10:30 p.m., the usual poker game was underway in a shed attached to Anna Bracey's saloon when a disagreement erupted. Words were exchanged and a fight broke out, during which a lighted coal oil lamp was knocked over, starting the fire. It was never established just who the culprits were, but they left the scene without reporting the fire. The arrow in this photograph points to the wooden shed where the fire began. A B&O locomotive crew, switching railroad cars near the depot, noticed the flames and sounded the first alarm by blowing frequent blasts on the locomotive's whistle to arouse the town. Soon after, someone began ringing the town hall fire bell. Once sufficient firemen arrived, they pulled the hand pumper and hose cart toward the fire 2 blocks away. The fire spreads on the west side of Main Street. The Opera House was filled with a capacity crowd enjoying a performance when the alarm bell at City Hall began ringing. Pandemonium erupted as the crowd evacuated the building. When the audience members reached the street, they were greeted by the sight of flames rapidly marching north up the street toward them. By this time, saloon patrons, many inebriated, were also spilling into the streets, adding to the mayhem. Using the nearby fire cistern as a water source, firemen soon began to pour water on burning sheds and privies along the alley at the rear of the commercial buildings. However, the closest cistern was on Main Street. Consequently, firemen had to hand pump water through long hose lengths to the building's rear. This made the effort slower and more difficult. In addition, as feared, the water supply soon ran out. The fire then gained headway while the firemen relocated the engine to another cistern. The fire rapidly spread through the tinder-dry sheds from the rear of Anna Bracey's saloon to the rear of next-door stores. The Dillinger block's brick walls provided little protection as a strong, steady southwest wind forced the flames through the windows and doors in the rear walls and into the store interiors. Once inside, the wooden furniture and goods provided new fuel for the flames. Further, the wind created a blowtorch effect that rapidly pushed the flames through the open first floor interiors and upward into the second-story rooms. There was a two-story frame sheet metal covered warehouse building behind Mayor Clark's drugstore. That structure checked the flames for a period, but the walls soon grew hot and transmitted the heat into the interior, which burst into flames. The fire moved northward in the same pattern, first igniting wooden outbuildings and then spreading into stores through rear windows and doors. In some cases, the intense heat generated interior fires even before the flames were able to break through from the outside. The seemingly unstoppable and rapid movement of the fire prompted fears that the whole town would be destroyed as the fire spread along both sides of Main Street north of the railroad. As seen on the map, the strong southwest wind rapidly carried the heat and embers from the burning west side to the east side, where they ignited a series of 10 to 12 cheaply constructed light wooden buildings stretching northward from the railroad tracks along Main Street. Many of them were saloons. According to the Beacon account, these buildings, being thoroughly dry, went up in a flash as their fronts spontaneously burst into flame so rapidly that merchants were unable to get many goods out of them. Approximately an hour into the fire, the flames on Main Street began to generate their own winds, which increased into a gale as the heat intensified. The winds carried sparks in a northeasterly direction, igniting the west side of North Tar Street. In 1891, Tar Street, with its brick paving, trees, and attractive new homes, was considered the most beautiful street in town. Many of North Baltimore's wealthiest merchants and oilmen lived in the area. Since the firemen and equipment were busy on Main Street, none were available to fight the flames on North Tar. Residents could not remove their belongings before they were consumed. In the end, 3 large homes on Tar were completely destroyed. Luckily, a change in the wind spared the homes on Tar Street's east side and halted the fire's spread into town's eastern residential areas. This photograph shows the Victorian homes on North Tar Street's east side that were spared. Very similar homes on the street's west side were burned. At the same time that the fire moved east to North Tar Street, the flames continued to advance northward along Main Street's east side, as shown on this map. The brick Katzenmeyer building slowed the flames for a time, but once again the fire ignited small wooden structures in the building's rear. Heat-broken windows allowed the flames to access the store's interior. This pattern continued along the street, and soon 4 additional wood frame structures were in flames. Fostoria sends help at a crucial time. By 11 p.m., it had become apparent that the fire was overwhelming the North Baltimore Fire Department, so Mayor Clark telegraphed Fostoria for help. B&O Railroad officials put together a special train to transport the Fostoria fire apparatus and its crew the 15 miles to North Baltimore. Without the railroad's cooperation, the Fostoria firemen would have had to make a slow trip over the dirt road connecting the two towns. Working rapidly to load the fire equipment and crew, the B&O delivered the Fostoria firemen to North Baltimore by 11:30 p.m. Fostoria's firemen were immediately directed to fight the fire on Main Street's east side. The buildings between the railroad tracks and East Broadway were now all aflame and unsavable, but it was hoped that by concentrating on saving the First National Bank, the Fostoria firemen could halt the fire spread northward. North Baltimore's firemen could then concentrate on the west side of Main Street. Fostoria's assistance was invaluable. Their steam pumper, like the one in this picture, was able to spray water on the fire with a volume and force greater than that of North Baltimore's antiquated hand pumper. The steamer's biggest advantage, however, was its ability to pump water without interruption. The steamer did not get fatigued and required a crew of only 5 or 6 men, 1 or 2 to man the apparatus, 2 to 4 to handle the hoses, and 1 officer in charge. The fire did not progress as quickly on the west side, where there were more brick buildings, but these buildings eventually went up in flames too, including two stores and the Newburgh Hotel. Eyewitness accounts related terrifying spectacle of walls crashing down, hissing broken glass pipes spewing flames, intense smoke interspersed with embers and sparks, and great heat. This map shows the progress of the fire on both sides of North Main Street and the two buildings whose high brick walls helped stop the fire's progression. By 1 a.m., the fire had reached the Henry Opera House on Main Street's west side. Eyewitnesses described the towering flames licking against the Opera House's walls with great intensity. It was here that North Baltimore's firemen decided to make their stand, while spectators looked on scene enthralled. The newspaper accounts credit North Baltimore's firemen with making heroic and almost superhuman efforts to prevent the building's destruction. The firemen worked relentlessly to continually spray water on the Opera House's windowless, 50-foot high and 100-foot long side wall, ultimately saving the structure. Although it sustained some exterior damage, the Opera House withstood the worst of the conflagration. Later, the Beacon's editor praised Dr. Henry for having had the foresight to build his opera house with exterior walls that served as such an effective fire break. Eventually, the flames by the opera house subsided as all the nearby combustible materials were consumed. A most spectacular blaze. The critical moment at the height of the fire on Main Street's east side was around 1:30 a.m. at Gibson's hardware store at the intersection of North Main and East Broadway. Here the fire was hottest, and eyewitnesses described the flames as reaching their highest in the sky and visible from 15 miles away. This was likely due to the large amount of paint and other flammable contents of Gibson's hardware store. Although it was a brick building, it provided no obstacle to the fire's advance. The heat was so intense that it ignited the four wooden buildings across East Broadway Street behind the First National Bank. For a time, it was feared that the bank building itself would go up in flames. The First National Bank building's high and windowless east brick wall acted as a barrier to the fire's advance along East Broadway Street. Although several wooden buildings beside the bank were destroyed, the Fostoria firemen succeeded in stopping the flames' advance. The Fostoria Fire Department worked tirelessly to save the bank building, using their steam engine's ability to continually spray water to cool the building's walls. This was the same firefighting tactic used by North Baltimore's firemen on Main Street's west side. The Fostoria crew overcame water limitations by tapping a sewer. As on the west side, the fire died down since it was unable to advance. By 2 a.m. on Saturday, October 31st, the fire's northward progression had been halted. It was apparent that the worst was over and that the rest of the town would be spared. The wind had died down, and the fire had consumed most of the combustible material in the destroyed buildings. The firemen were now able to extinguish what fire pockets remained in the burned area. When dawn finally came, exhausted firemen looking north from the B&O Railroad crossing would have seen this view: the Opera House on the left and the First National Bank building on the right marked the northern boundaries of the destruction. Ironically, if you look closely at the lower left side of the photograph, you can see cast iron water pipes that the water company was installing for the town's new water system. Aftermath of the Great Fire. On Saturday, October 31st, and for several days after, thousands of sightseers came by train and by horse and buggy to view the ruins. The fire was a major news story for days in the region's newspapers. While the fire wiped out 16 of North Baltimore's 23 saloons, the remaining establishments did a brisk business. Even those saloon owners whose businesses were destroyed were among the most energetic in rebuilding and reopening their establishments. In fact, a saloon was the first business to reopen in the burned area. The Beacon editor calculated North Baltimore's fire losses to be approximately $225,000 in 1891 currency. This would be nearly $8,165,000 in 2026, adjusting for inflation. Many insurance agents came to town the first week to settle claims, which enabled businessmen to immediately begin rebuilding. According to a November 6th Beacon News article, Mayor Clark had carried insurance totaling $10,000. However, this did not cover his total loss of $14,000. Anna Bracy, whose saloon was not insured, lost $500. She did not reestablish her business. Mayor Clark, however, rebuilt his drugstore and retired many years later as a wealthy businessman. North Baltimore's Burn District was a beehive of activity throughout the remainder of 1891 and most of 1892. The oil boom was still generating money, and the sooner a merchant got his business up and running, the sooner he could again make money. By the summer of 1893, most merchants had reopened their stores in either new locations or new buildings. This circa 1895 photograph of a rebuilt North Main Street shows a business district with mostly brick buildings. The Great Fire of 1891 had significantly disrupted North Baltimore's oil boom prosperity, but the subsequent rebuilding efforts greatly improved the appearance and nature of the town's main thoroughfare. In addition, it spurred the citizenry to improve the town's water system, firefighting capabilities, and building quality. While the Great Fire itself has been mostly forgotten, a few vestiges of North Main Street's rebuilding can still be seen in this 21st century photograph of the corner of East Broadway and North Main. The building, currently housing the Fraternal Order of Eagles, was among the first structures rebuilt after the fire. Over the last 135 years, the building's street-level facade has been radically altered and does not retain any original architectural features. However, its second-floor windows and cornices retain their 19th century Victorian designs. If you look at the very top of the Eagles building, you will see the builder's name, Emerine, along with an 1892. To North Baltimore's residents of the time, this date represented the recovery of North Main Street from the Great Fire of 1891. Thank you for watching this video presentation on the history of North Baltimore.